Hi, my name is Michael King and I'm the principal broker and CEO of Pradium Realty. The purpose of this video is to explain to you, the seller, what real estate disclosures are, how they work, what your agent's obligations are when it comes to disclosures, and how disclosures can be harmful to you during the home sale process. We're also going to talk about how Pradium Realty protects you when it comes to home inspections and the disclosure issues that may arise from them. Now, what exactly is a disclosure when it comes to real estate? Well, to put it simply, a disclosure is the act of making something known. And in Massachusetts, there are certain things that must be disclosed by law. And some key examples of this would be who an agent works for. Are they representing the buyer or are they representing the seller? You probably remember signing a paper the first time you met with your agent, and this is because agents in Massachusetts are required by law at the first face-to-face meeting to discuss a specific property to give you a document called a consumer relationship disclosure. The consumer relationship disclosure makes it known what the agent's relationship is to you, the consumer. It tells you whether an agent represents the buyer or you, the seller. Another example of a mandatory disclosure would be lead paint. In Massachusetts, it is required by law that the seller of a property built before 1978 disclose to the buyer whether or not there is any known lead-based paint on the premises. This is typically done using a document called a property transfer lead paint notification, commonly called a lead paint disclosure. And my final example of a mandatory disclosure is a known property defect. This can be one of the trickiest types of disclosures to understand, but to put it simply, in Massachusetts, a listing agent, meaning that they represent the seller, must disclose to all potential buyers any and all known defects about the property that they're selling. For example, if an agent is at the house during a rainstorm and they observe an active leak in the roof, they are now required by law to tell all potential buyers about the leak. Additionally, real estate professionals are also required to voluntarily disclose any fact that may influence the buyer not to purchase the property. Today, we're going to focus specifically on property defect disclosures and their effects on the home sale process. The first thing that is important to understand is that a real estate agent is only allowed to operate within the scope of their real estate license. A real estate license only allows an agent to help their client purchase, sell, or rent properties. Anything outside of that scope must be handled by a qualified professional who is licensed in the applicable field of service. For example, plumbing issues can only be addressed by licensed plumbers. Electrical issues can only be addressed by licensed electricians. Roof issues can only be addressed by licensed contractors. Legal advice can only be provided by licensed attorneys. And home inspections can only be performed by licensed home inspectors. In the same sense, property can only be marketed for sale by a licensed real estate agent, not by a plumber or an electrician or a home inspector, etc. Now, a home inspector's license is a little bit different. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts states that a home inspector reviews the readily accessible exposed portions of the structure of the home, including the roof, the attic, walls, ceiling, floors, windows, doors, basement, and foundation, as well as the heating systems, air conditioning systems, interior plumbing, and electrical systems for potential problems. Now, just because the home inspector is allowed to inspect these things, it does not mean that they are a replacement for a qualified and licensed professional in the applicable field of service. A lot of times when the buyer gets the home inspection report back, a lot of the issues that are listed in the report will say, consult a qualified professional. But it's also important to understand that any issue discovered during a home inspection that the listing agent, meaning the agent representing the seller, is made aware of, now has to be disclosed to all future buyers. Buyer's agents know this, and what they'll usually do is send the listing agent a big long list of issues detailed in the home inspection report and use those issues as leverage to negotiate down the sale price or ask the seller to make repairs. This is very common during a real estate sale, and it's something to be prepared for. The next thing I want to talk about is the standard home inspection clause. Most offer contracts have a standard home inspection clause, which, if accepted by the seller, lets the buyer have a home inspection within a specified period of time, typically 10 days. After the buyer has their home inspection and reviews the home inspection report, the clause allows the buyer to do one of two things: move forward with the transaction as is, or back out of the transaction and get their deposit back. And that's it. This is super important to understand. A lot of sellers, a lot of buyers, and even a lot of real estate professionals don't realize this, but there is nothing in the clause that gives the buyer the right to renegotiate the sale price or ask for repairs. You might be asking yourself, if the home inspection clause doesn't say anything about renegotiating after the home inspection, why has it become such a common practice? And the answer is simple: leverage. Remember a few minutes ago when I said that after a home inspection, the buyer's agent will often send the listing agent a long list of issues from the home inspection report? Well, that's because they know that these issues are property defects. And as soon as the listing agent is made aware of them, they have to be disclosed to all future buyers. This means that if the current buyer backs out of the transaction, you as the seller are now left with a less marketable property. Most sellers at this point start to question whether or not they'll be able to find another buyer at the current agreed upon price, or whether they'll have to drop the price if the house goes back on the market, or whether they'll be able to find another buyer at all. Most sellers in this situation feel backed against a wall, and rightfully so. In our experience, most, not all, but most sellers will cave to all or at least some of the buyer's demands at this point, and all because of disclosures. When this situation arises, we as the listing agent either disclose these newly discovered property defects right in the property listing itself, or we create a separate disclosure addendum with the entire list of property defects. This addendum is then referenced in the listing and posted as an attachment on the MLS. The only way to remove these disclosures is for a qualified and licensed professional in the applicable field to either repair the defect or provide documentation stating that the defect has been inspected and is not a defect. I'll use the roof leak example again. Let's say that a possible roof leak is discovered during a home inspection. The buyer's agent then notifies the listing agent that there was a roof leak discovered during the home inspection. The listing agent creates a disclosure on the property listing that states something like, possible roof leak near chimney and attic. This disclosure has to stay on the listing until a qualified and licensed roofing professional either repairs the roof leak or states that the leak is not active. If the leak is repaired, a paid work order will need to be provided as proof. If the roofing professional states that the leak is not active, they should provide something in writing stating this. Now the disclosure can be removed from the listing. Within the last few years, we've been seeing a rise in a newer home inspection trend. The housing market was red hot, and just about every house that was listed had numerous buyers and multiple offers. Buyers started including a specific clause in their offer: home inspection for informational purposes only. This clause sounds pretty self-explanatory, or at least you would think. It means that the buyer would like to have a home inspection, but that they were waiving the right to back out of the deal due to issues discovered during that home inspection, without losing their deposit. This gave buyers in a hot market an edge over competing offers with a traditional home inspection clause, and it was a great tool for getting offers accepted. But now we've been seeing a new trend, and it's not a good one for sellers. Now that the housing market has cooled off a little bit, buyers are still using the clause home inspection for informational purposes only. Then, after the home inspection, the buyer's agent sends a list of property defects over to the listing agent and attempts to negotiate down the price or ask for repairs just like they would with a traditional home inspection. We all understand that the home inspection was for informational purposes only, right? Well, guess what? Because the buyer's agent sent the list of defects to the listing agent still has to disclose those issues to future buyers. This puts the seller right back in the same position as with a traditional home inspection clause. If the buyer backs out, sure, they should lose their deposit, but you, the seller, are still left with a less marketable property, and you're right back up against the same wall. We recently sold a property that had a traditional home inspection where 10 to 12 miscellaneous property defects were discovered, and the buyer's agent sent them to us. The buyer requested that the seller make repairs, but the seller refused to make any repairs, and the buyer backed out of the deal. We then disclosed the list of property defects to all future buyers as a separate disclosure addendum attachment on the MLS. It became difficult to find a new buyer because of the disclosures, and after several months, we finally were able to find one. The second buyer used the clause home inspection for informational purposes only in their offer. This was desirable to the seller because this meant that the buyer was agreeing to move forward with the purchase regardless of the home inspection results, or they would risk losing their deposit. Well, guess what happened? After the new buyer's informational only home inspection, the home inspection report listed an entirely different list of defects from the first, maybe 4 or 5, and the agent sent them to us. The buyer asked the seller to either repair all the items or drop the price $20,000. These property defects now needed to be disclosed to all future buyers in addition to the first list of property defects. We reminded the buyer's agent that the home inspection was for informational purposes only, and that if the buyer backed out of the transaction, they would risk losing their $1,000 deposit. The buyer's agent explained that the buyer would rather lose their deposit than move forward with the purchase as is, and our sellers found themselves right back up against a wall. Unfortunately, against our advice, the sellers agreed to drop the price by $20,000. It's a crazy story. So, what can you do as a seller to avoid falling into the same trap? Well, there are 2 things you can do to protect yourself. The first thing you can do is require all buyers requesting a home inspection to give a larger deposit with their offer. For example, a $5,000 deposit instead of $1,000. This means that the buyer will think twice before backing out of a transaction and possibly losing their deposit. The second thing you can do to protect yourself is you can clarify the home inspection terms with the buyer up front. This means that you and the buyer agree to the terms of the home inspection prior to accepting their offer. As far as I know, Pradium Realty is the only real estate brokerage that has a separate home inspection addendum that specifically spells out the terms of a waived home inspection, a traditional home inspection, and an informational-only home inspection. The way it works is you, the seller, tell us, your listing agent, in writing, not to present any offers to you that are not accompanied by a buyer-signed copy of our home inspection addendum. We then include a disclosure in the property listing stating that all offers must be accompanied by a Pradium Realty home inspection addendum. The addendum gets signed by the buyer and states the minimum deposit amount that you are willing to accept for an offer with a waived home inspection, a traditional home inspection, or an informational-only home inspection. The addendum also details the terms of each type of home inspection. For example, a waived home inspection means that the buyer is agreeing to waive their rights to a home inspection altogether. A traditional home inspection means that after the home inspection, the buyer can either move forward with the purchase as is or back out of the transaction and get their deposit back, but that the buyer and buyer's agent agree not to send any information from the home inspection report to the seller or the listing agent without written permission from the seller. If the buyer or buyer's agent sends any information from the inspection report to the seller or listing agent without written permission, the buyer will forfeit their deposit. And lastly, an informational-only home inspection means that the buyer agrees to move forward with the purchase regardless of the home inspection results, or they will forfeit their deposit, and that the buyer and buyer's agent agree not to send any information from the home inspection report to the seller or the listing agent, or the buyer will forfeit their deposit. The Pradium Realty Home Inspection Addendum is essentially a disclosure that clarifies in detail to all parties of the transaction the terms of a home inspection. This is what Pradium Realty does to protect you, the seller, from losing control of your home sale. Now that you know all about property defects, the disclosures that go along with them, home inspections, and how to keep control of your home sale, it's time to bring the video to an end. This information can be a lot to take in, so if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to your Pradium Realty agent. You are also welcome to contact me directly. My name is Michael King. I'm the principal broker and CEO of Pradium Realty, and my number is 978-627-4426, extension 402. And my email address is michael@pradiumrealty.com. Thanks for watching.